Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the November edition of Molten Music Monthly. Oh November, what a jolly month you've been, what with all of your constant counting of election votes, your lockdowns and your open fighting between manufacturers. It's hell out there, but here's all the good stuff that I could find. Ford's Superberry is a super hip, super melodramatic synthesizer. Error Instruments makes a horrible noise with the liquid glitcher. Cherry Audio gives us a whole 2600 to play with. Meanwhile, a virtual 2500 is just as incomprehensible as the real thing. Look Mum No Computer finishes his mission to create a Kosmo synthesizer with a rather freaky funky filter. Tascam has some new interfaces. Dreadbox gives us some well-needed Antidote and Euphoria. Instruo loads up the intervals with a quad oscillator. Korg has got a synth and a sequencer. Xodes PV44 will give you a modular and AFX mode. Ableton Live announces number 7. No, it doesn't. Ableton Live announces number 11. Meanwhile, Cubase does actually go to 11. Nano ONA are some really nice VCOs. OXI One is one impressive looking desktop sequencer. The Synths Black Sequencer is finally finished and available. Tesseract Turka is a weirdest looking trigger sequencer ever. Befaco finds their inner rebel. And Noise Engineering opens up a portal to Versio. But first, Behringer. Yeah, here we are again. There's no end to this drama, no end to this soap opera that's unfolding in front of the world of music technology and synthesizers. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, really. But anyway, so what's going on with that? So what happened is, right, I mean, there are a few things that Behringer have done this month. They've asked their little group whether they should clone a theremin, whether they should redo their RD9 drum machine into Eurorack format, also whether they should redo their BCF and BCR 2000 controllers. You know, interesting run-of-the-mill stuff, all of which the Behringer crowd are going, yeah, give us one of those, yeah, that'd be great. But then we had Swing. Now, Swing is a unobtrusive-looking MIDI controller. It's got keys on it, some buttons, transport controls, a couple of knobs, bit of a sequencer inside, CV and gate outputs. You go, haven't we seen this before? Yes, we have seen this before, because it is an almost exact copy of the Arturia keystep. And we're all a little bit troubled by this. Now, you don't have to be troubled by this. Anyone can build anything they like. Of course they can, whatever, get over it, and all those kinds of things. But when a company, a large manufacturer, releases a product which is identical to one that already exists and is already in the sales channel, is already being sold, already being used, that just doesn't feel right. There's something within us that makes us think, well, that's just not quite, that's not quite cricket. That's not quite playing the game. That's not really how we like life to work, And so the internet went into a bit of a furore about it. On one hand, people going, yeah, whatever, it's just stuff in it. And the other hand, people going, but Arturia worked really hard on producing a really decent little keyboard sequencer thing that lots of people bought, lots of people like. They put all that effort into it, all the marketing and stuff, and then Behringer come along and go, look, we've got this great new thing. Same as the old thing. It's great, it's new, it's exciting, and look what we created. And it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I don't think there's any doubt about whether it's a copy or not, because they are the same. I'm sure I've got a picture of it up somewhere, and they're the same. You can see that they're the same. And it pushes all sorts of buttons, it triggers all sorts of things, and it makes us reassess what on earth all this is about. Because we're relatively happy with Behringer resurrecting old synthesizers. We're kind of fine with that. If it's a dead synthesizer particularly, they're bringing these things back and allowing people who never had the opportunity to play on these synths to play on authentic versions of them, which are probably going to last longer and be better behaved than the originals. And that's great. A bunch of old synths we get to play with for very little money. It's extraordinary, really. But then when they clone something which currently exists and do really nothing to hide it, that feels different. Should it feel different? I don't know. Should it? Are we all just being a bunch of hypocrites? Who knows? But it's just been quite an interesting conversation, you know. I mean, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I have. I'm quite happy to call out Behringer on stuff they do, which is nuts or crazy or stupid or just plain rude. While at the same time, I'm also happy to review Behringer gear and to talk about it. You know, I have bits of Behringer gear here, so I'm not a hater. And I'm not a massive fanboy either. It's, you know, it's good, it's bad. They do good things, they do bad things. You know, everybody does. But this just seems rude. It's just rude. It's just rude. Anyway, so in the commentary, lots of people bouncing up and down, lots of people saying that, you know, it's all just made in China anyway. And so all Behringer did was bought the same license that Arturia did. You know, what's a big deal? All those kinds of things. Actually, all of that is nonsense. That's not the case, because it was designed by Alex Hartman exclusively for Arturia. Arturia came to his design company and said, "We'd like this, please." And he said, "All right, yo." You know, designed it up, gave it to them, and as that transaction occurs, you go to a design company, they design something, it doesn't remain the design of the design companies because you've paid them to make a design which is then becomes yours. So Arturia own that design. There's no licensing going on at all. And so there has been no license given to Behringer. There's no conversation, there's no development, there's no agreement. There's nothing of that kind has gone on at all. So it is purely Behringer taking somebody else's product, looking at it, taking it apart, building their own one, and trying to sell it. And the weird thing is that it's about the same price. It's not even as if they're undercutting them by a huge amount. You know, $10, I think, is the difference in price. So it just leaves you with this sense that Behringer are being blatantly and outwardly deceitful in some way. Because when they announce it, they go, "Look at our new controller." They don't go, "Look at our homage to the Arturia key step." No. They just claim that it's theirs and their idea. It just feels weird. Now, Arturia have stepped up and said, you know, this isn't really quite right, is it? And so has the designer, and they've put out statements to say that they had nothing to do with Behringer at all, and it's a little bit uncalled for, we think. I mean, I don't think there's any mention of anybody suing anybody, because that's just such a huge thing to try to get into. And at the same time, we understand that these things occur. I mean, just to add further weirdness to it, Behringer has kind of come back to say that, oh, look, everyone's calling us out on our swing product, which sort of seems a bit unnecessary, because this sort of thing happens all the time, and then try to explain capitalism and the nature of competition to us all. Oh, you know, which is nice. It's funny, you know. I thought you were just stealing ideas from other people. What I didn't realise that that's my fault for misunderstanding the nature of capitalism. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks for correcting me. You know. And what they did is they put up a load of pictures of other similar products that are made by, you know, dodgy Chinese companies. So Behringer is essentially saying we're a dodgy Chinese company, you know, because all these other dodgy Chinese companies do these sorts of things, and so we kind of feel that we should too. I don't know. I mean, music technology is a creative industry. This is about musicians. It's about creativity. It's about making music. You know, the stuff that feeds our very souls. And so the choices that we make and the technology that we use and the instruments that we buy, they feed into these ideas of what we are and who we are as people, don't they? It's not like you're buying a USB hub, or you're trying to buy an external hard drive, or some other piece of technology which 1,000 different companies do 1,000 different versions of that all at the same. These are music making instruments. And again, these aren't faceless brands or own brands or home brands, or, you know, it's not Tesco's Fruit and Fibre compared to Kellogg's, you know. Behringer needs to realise that they're a grown-up. They're supposed to be grown-ups in this industry. And it boggles my mind. I mean, why go to all the trouble of reverse engineering something and then make it look the same? What's the point of that? They could at least hide the fact by making it look a bit different, or change it, or do something extra Because that's the thing. Why don't they contribute? Why don't they do something which pushes us forward as opposed to just makes us all feel a bit crap? I don't get it. I don't get the motivation. I mean, there is definitely talented people in Music Tribe who can design stuff. There's people there who can do that. So why don't they? It seems such a cynical move. I can't quite wrap my head around it. Once again, it comes up to the question of, well, what do we do in response to that? Do we just go, oh, boo, Behringer, that's bad? Or do we stop buying their products? Do we boycott their products? Do we no longer talk or speak of their products? Is there any point in that? I mean, how many things have Apple copied from other companies or stolen or used or replicated, and yet we still use their products and their iPhones and their iPads and the bits and pieces? I'm not trying to say that it's fair, that it's logical. I'm not trying to say that I'm not a hypocrite in saying any of this. I really don't know. I have an order in for a 2600 and I don't know what to do about that. I don't know whether that's something I'm going to continue with. I know plenty of people, far cooler, hipper people than me, who go, no to anything Behringer. And that's fine. I don't know necessarily that I'm in a position to do that. Well, of course I am. I can do whatever I like. I mean, because the thing is that they also did this picture of their BCR 2000, this old knob controller they used to do, and it was theirs. There was nothing else like it at the time, really. And it was brilliant. It was encoders or LEDs around it. You can see where everything was. It's dead cheap, and it would do the job. It's quite a clever little device, and they're thinking about reissuing that in some kind of in some kind of evolved way, and that will be brilliant. It's your controller, Behringer. Do what you like. Do that. That's great. Something that's yours, something that you own, something that forges your identity rather than making money off somebody else's thing, product, design. I don't know. Anyway, whatever you feel about it, that's fine. Stick it in the comments by all means. And we'll no doubt talk about it again. But I mean, overall, it just seems like such a shame. It's almost like Behringer can't help themselves. They spend 6 months doing reasonable, good stuff. They release a few products, they do some interesting bits and pieces, and they do their thing, and then wham, they smack you with something that makes you go, oh, what on earth are you doing? And then it calms down and we all kind of forget and we all get on with our lives. And then wham! I don't know. Well, it keeps them in the news, I guess. Anyway, moving on. Now, Superberry from Fours is an enigmatic little FM synth, which is all about the melodrama, apparently. It's all about the idea of recapturing those nights you spent on the tiles listening to trance music, dancing your little heart out. It's trying to recreate that vibe down to the stink of the club and the sweat. No, not really. I mean, it looks gorgeous. This thing is designed to die for in a range of different colours. You can have it a minimalist interface, and you just sort of pull on little knobs and bits and pieces, and this sound starts to emerge. It all comes from an FM core. It's all infused with phase modulation, stacked in there with a super sharp super saw and sub oscillator. It has all sorts of delays and other stuff going on, and it comes with this roulette device, which is a polymetric and asymmetric rhythm sequencer, I suppose. Oh, I don't know. They're both written for Max for Live. You stick these two devices together and they fight with each other and produce these extraordinary tones and movements and evolutions and soundscapes and bubblings and bits and pieces that go on. Now, Error Instruments continue to be awesome with the Liquid Glitcher. This is a weird call it an oscillator. Should we call it an oscillator? Oh, I don't know. It just sort of makes noise in lots of different horrible ways, and you can stuff stuff into it and play with parameters that make the sort of awful noise turn into a more gnarly awful noise, and then a fall apart bit crushed awful noise, and then this awful noise can then get modulated by another awful noise, and then that kind of FMs out an awful noise. It's sort of like you control its state of mind from madness to complete raving dribbling thing, and so as you turn the knobs, it just increases the level of awfulness. So the Liquid Glitcher is essentially a headache in a module that you can stick into your rack in order just to break things. I mean, maybe on purpose, who knows? I mean, maybe you can put in some randomization, some probability over the nature of death that you're going to receive from this thing. I mean, I guess it's the modular equivalent of having stabbed in the eye with a fork or something. I don't know. I love Air Instrument stuff. It's just nuts, and I think we're all the better for it. Cherry Audio surprised us last week with their DCO 106, a sort of a Juno 106 synthesizer emulation in software. Cherry Audio have been focused very much on their voltage modular thing, you know, a big Eurorack virtual environment, which has been great and interesting and slightly complicated and good, but developing and getting more and more interesting all the time. And then suddenly, wham, they release a Juno 106. And you go, oh, wow, and it's really good. Great, and it's $25. Fantastic. So yeah, that was rather good. And then, just as we're playing around with that, suddenly, woo, a 2600. A proper full size, I don't know, proper, full screen maybe up 2600. An emulation of that with all of the different filter types and different colorizations and different versions all stuffed in there, all patchable in the same way that the voltage modular is. And it's also great. So it gives you an opportunity to work out how on earth it is you would patch a 2600 if you had a 2600, like the Korg one or the ARP one, or maybe you've built your own TTSH from a kit. I mean, how awesome would that be? Maybe that's going to be one of my next projects. Anyway, so the Cherry Audio one is fantastic. It looks great, it works great, it sounds great. Comes with a whole bunch of presets, so you don't have to like scratch your head about it the whole time. You can just turn a few of those on and then just play with a few sliders, which is always a good way to start with this sort of thing. So yeah, it's great. Again, $25. You know, I had to pick up both of them because they're just so good, just so good. And they work standalone or plugins, that kind of thing. Very easy to use, very easy to get into, sound great. No complaints. Good job. Talking of ARP, came across this software emulation of the 2500. 2500. Now this is the big sort of fills a room type synthesizer. Not like your friendly ARP 2600 that's in a suitcase. No, this fills your entire dresser. And you've got a bunch of modules, maybe a dozen modules. I think it wasn't a particularly big synthesizer in terms of the range of modules that you could get for it. The bigness came in this huge matrix switch thing that you use for patching everything. You'd move these switches up and down and they would make the connections. So it was completely devoid of cabling. You did everything on these switches, which was interesting, complicated, and a little bit boggling. So anyway, some geezer, right, has produced something called the G2500, and it is an impossibly authentic emulation of the 2500 in software. It sits all over your screen, and you look at it going, I don't know how to make a sound. I don't know how to get the sound from the oscillator to go somewhere, and so I can hear it. I don't know how to do that. So I'm scratching my beard going, I have no clue. And because this is, you know, the piece of software itself has its quirks in that how on earth do you find presets for it? You know, it took me ages to work out how on earth you do that. There's lots of keyboard shortcuts involved in bringing up menus, and so it's not particularly intuitive in how you work out the bits behind the software, how you open presets and get things to go. But there is some stuff in there that'll allow you to try to work out backwards. So how is sound coming out of this? Oh, okay. So that's the key bit over here. This switch over here is put in that position, and that sends audio to. So this is an audio output, right? Okay. So you can sort of reverse engineer your way through it in order to then start making positive and useful connections to things. It's very interesting, though. I mean, it sounds great. I have no idea what an original 2500 sounds like, particularly. I've got a Behringer 2500 filter up here, which I have to say sounds great. Does it sound like the original? I have no clue about that, but you know, it sounds pretty good to me. So if you're interested in proper hardcore, don't know how to make it work type synthesizers, then you should definitely go and check that out. Now, Sam Battle from Look Mum No Computer set himself a challenge to produce a module a month in his own Kosmo format. This is large Eurorack, if you like, which he decided to make modules of to improve his live performance rig. You know what I mean? And now it's turned into a bit of a thing. I've got a couple of them here. I mean to make my own Kosmo synth as soon as I can get around to it, and we've almost got through the first VCO. But anyway, he's finished it. I don't think he's finished it. He's achieved the mission of producing one module a month. So he now has 12, I think it is actually 13 modules available in Kosmo format. And the final one that he's produced is one he's calling the Funky Filter Grrr. And it's like a filter with some weird stuff going on. It has some kind of offset boost thing, which makes it grrr more than it just does weird stuff, and he enjoys that kind of stuff. And so he's put it together, and it's available as a PCB and front panel, and then you have to find all the bits and pieces yourself. There's a great forum of enthusiasts who are there building these things and helping people out building these things, so do go and visit that if you're interested. But you'll find them on the Look Mum No Computer website, all sort of scattered about amongst his other various projects, but all of them, a reasonably good value for money, 30-40 quid for the set. Then you've got to buy the components, but they're a great thing. And it's this large format. You've got really nice big knobs. It's what he calls metric 5U. It's about, so big. And so you can really get your hands in there without having to worry about the weediness of Eurorack. It also uses full-size 1/4-inch jacks, stuff like that. It's a great idea. And I'm really into the idea of building my own modular Kosmo system. But there's more than enough modules now in this format to build an entire modular synth, which is pretty awesome. Tascam have some new audio interfaces. Woohoo! I hear you all say, yay, audio interfaces, they're the best thing, they're my favourite thing. Love audio interfaces, give us another audio interface. So they did. These ones, they say, are for DJs. They're for live streamers and home studios and producers. So everyone, really, is what they're saying. These are for everyone. And I have to say, they kind of look like most audio interfaces, because audio interfaces they do tend to. And so you've got a 1 in, 2 out, a 2 in, 2 out, and a 4 in, 4 out, with actually 4 mic pre's on the front, which is not as usual as you would imagine. And so that's good to see. They're quite eye-catching with these sort of side bits on them and a sticky uppy bit, so it actually sits up on the desk, because often with these 1U style audio interfaces, they sit flat and it can be sometimes a faff to get things in, but these are sit up a little bit, which I quite like. Fair play for thinking of doing something slightly different. And these are very much following the recent trend to have a loopback function, which means you can record the output of your software back into the inputs again, and which is great for podcasting, great for live streaming, those kinds of things. Nice monitor balance knob on the front. It's got RCA inputs and outputs as well, which is the whole DJ thing. And I mean, maybe there's a slight point to make here, which is that it's the same as a lot of other audio interfaces. Audio interfaces all essentially do the same thing. You get a couple of inputs. There'll be a version with 2 inputs and a version with 4 inputs, 4 outputs on the back, a couple of mic preamps, monitoring knob, loopback function, same sort of size sort of box, some kind of monitoring switches and such like. They all essentially do the same thing. But every audio interface from all these different manufacturers, whether it's Motu, Tascam, Focusrite, Presonus, all these different people, they just make it their own. It's all doing the same thing. We know and we understand that they are all doing essentially the same thing with the same level of functionality, probably the same level of quality, but they design them in such a way that you know which company they belong to, because that makes sense. You have some sense of ownership, you have some sense of brand and loyalty perhaps, and some reassurance that this company has put something together on purpose. It may be that the insides are all identical from the same place, built by the same bloke. Who knows? But as far as the design and the product goes, you just get this sense that it's something that they've designed and they've built and they're selling to you and you're buying it from them. It's a transaction that we understand. It's a relationship that we understand. If they were to all just copy each other and have all the boxes look exactly the same, I think we'd be much, much poorer for it. Just a thought. Dreadbox has released a couple more modules for their chromatic range. This is their sort of value Eurorack range, which is brilliant. Brilliantly coloured, looks absolutely spectacular in your rack because it looks different to something that anybody else has done. They all follow the same similar sort of format of 4 knobs, 4 faders, and some patch points in and out, and that, I guess, is what has enabled them to do them at such a good value sort of price. The new 2 off the block are Euphoria and Antidote, which is ever there were 2 words which seem very appropriate these days. That would be them. Antidote is a car plus strong module, which means it creates kind of string sounds by using an incredibly short delay or something, and some kind of triggering mechanism, resonator, which creates a ping, which then sounds a bit like a string. And you can also process audio directly, so you can either sort of trigger it, ping, and you get a stringy plucked string sound, or you can stick stuff through it and it will create a resonating kind of sound field around it. Interesting. I mean, part of the thing with these Dreadbox chromatic modules is that they're not run-of-the-mill. They're not straightforward. They're actually a little bit quirky and interesting, with different strange parameters and bits and pieces you can do with them that you wouldn't have perhaps expected. The other one is Euphoria, and this is an 8-stage phase shifter. A phaser, would you believe? It's not moving your sound in and out of phase and around the place. Very interesting. It also has the ability to take a guitar input directly in, which is, on the one hand, just great fun for playing guitar, but also it will bring your guitar into your Eurorack, if that's something that's interesting to you, which I would say it should be. Beautiful things from Instruo, again, always inevitably beautiful things. This time around it's a quad VCO with 4 oscillators. They're calling it Saich, possibly Saich. Oh, I don't know. You can look that up, I'm sure. Anyway, quad oscillator. It's got 4 sawtooth waveforms being generated inside, which can be individually and globally detuned to create chords, intervals, and other interesting kind of things. Everything follows oscillator 1, so oscillator 1 is your main oscillator, then the other 3 oscillators are detuned relative to that. And it uses a really clever single knob way of mixing through how you're listening to those oscillators. So as you turn through different modes, it mixes some in, some out, it cross fades and morphs between this one and that one. Just there's something about the way that Instruo design stuff. It's just elegantly and beautifully thought through. Yet they never just give you here's a sound, here's a filter, or here's a module that does something. There's always other things going on. There's always looking for creative pathways. There's looking for ways that these things mesh and then unmesh, or they go about independently, or they come together, they mix and morph and combine. There's just so many lovely ideas going on in their modules. It's quite extraordinary. And of course the module looks beautiful too. How do they keep doing all these things so flipping well? They ought to release something rubbish so we can go, yeah, that was a bit of a dud, innit? But no, every time something just extraordinary. And this is no exception. You can push these tones about the place, the way that the output of all the different oscillators mesh and mold and pushed apart in intervals, bring back to unison, stuffed into a chord. Just beautiful. Interesting. I totally adore it. Korg had a couple of things up its sleeve this month. They got a little bit of leak action going on earlier on, but when they finally came, they were pretty darn good. First one is the SQ64 sequencer. Now, they sent me one of these, for which I'm eternally grateful. It's awesome. It's great. It's a desktop sequencer. 4 channels, 3 channels of melody, 1 of drums where you can have 8 CV triggers coming out the back, or 16 over MIDI. Each track can handle 64 steps. You've got things like ratcheting in there, you've got randomization, probability, you've got stochastic probability going on. You can mute stuff, come out stuff, turn things on, turn things off. You can have them all polyrhythmic, polymetrics, all that good stuff. But the coolest thing, maybe, and the thing that you probably should mention straight away, is the 64 pad buttons, or whatever it is it's got on the front. 64, because I don't know about you, but seeing 16s go around in different pages, that does drive me nuts after a while. So to have all 64 notes that you can see laid out in a pattern in front of you is brilliant. I love that a great deal. Obviously you can see all 4 channels at once as 16s, and then they will loop round in pages, and you can move on and use buttons to do that. But being able to see one of the single tracks as 64 steps, be able to turn those on and off and have a bigger overview of what's going on is ideal. I love that sort of thing. It has a bit of a BeatStep Pro vibe about it, which is deliberate, I imagine. But for me at least, I never really got on with the BeatStep Pro. Whereas this, I did straight away, very intuitively. I mean, it has to be intuitive on a Korg device because their manuals are a little bit kind of a head scratch. So it's good that you can just work your way straight in. Lots of stuff in there, good fun, easy to use, intuitive. Yeah, check out my full review. I did a review on YouTube about it, all about it. I took you through it for a good half an hour or so, and well worth watching because it's an interesting device. The other thing Korg had was an FM synth. What? Right, back at NAMM, beginning of the year, they were teasing us with this big synthesizer that was behind glass. They called it the OPSIX, and it had FM algorithms sort of drawn all over it like you do on a DX7. And essentially it was a kind of a DX7. That was the idea anyway. Now it turns out, I mean, nobody knew at the time whether it was a real thing or just a prototype or a potential thing, but it turns out it was absolutely a real thing, except they decided to squash it all down into the same sort of size as the Wave State, which has pleased some people and not pleased other people, of course. But it's funny, if you look at the prototype from the NAMM show, you can see that if you just chop off 2/3 of it, then there's your synth. That's exactly what they were going for. But anyway, so what is it? So it's an FM synthesizer, the idea being that they're trying to give people access to the notoriously difficult to program FM synthesis method. My first synthesizer was a DX100, and so for me FM programming isn't particularly difficult. I just thought that's how you program synths. You know, you step through each parameter, you change the data entry thing up and down, next parameter, that was the laborious nature of programming of my youth. But apparently, no, that's difficult. So what they've done is they've pulled out particular performance features, stuck them on the front, put sliders for levels on operators, created a whole bunch of algorithms that let you play and morph and find your way into it without having to understand what it is that you're supposed to be doing, which is great. I mean, you know, since we don't have to understand it, perfect. That's the sort of thing that I like. I just want to play with knobs and sliders, mate. That's all I'm after, and this is the sort of thing that's going to do that for you. Xodes, I think it might be pronounced, the PV44 is an interesting UREC module. The idea is that you can store within it 4 lots of 4 control voltages. So it's kind of like a preset machine. So you've got this grid of knobs, you set the knobs to the voltages that you want it to be, and then in response to a trigger, 4 of those, a row or a column of 4, can't remember which, gets thrown out of the 4 outputs at the bottom. So you could wire it into a particular module of some kind, and as I say, in response to a trigger, completely change how that is operating, you know, move the various parameters around. So you could see that as 4 different presets on that module that you've plugged it into. So on a trigger, boom, it's one preset, boom, another one, and the sound changes, another one, and the sound changes. So, you know, that's where this AFX mode idea comes from the base station to where you can hit a different key and it's a different patch on every key. So with this, on every trigger, you're essentially creating a different sound. And that's quite interesting. Quite interesting. You can also modulate the knobs by incoming control voltage as well. And of course, it doesn't just have to be going out to CV to control a module. You could be triggering things. You could be firing off sequences. You could be meshing together different modulators and different waveforms in order to create new and interesting waveforms, and routing things to effects or not, or going through different effects or different routings to things and stuff. Lots of different possibilities. It's an interesting module, I think, that would really benefit from a little bit of unpacking and exploring. Ableton Live 11 was announced. I think they do this every 2 years, almost as regular as clockwork. They release the next version, or they announce it before Christmas and it comes around in the new year. Version 11 of Ableton Live. Can you imagine it? I remember version 1 many years ago. Anyway, so what's new? What's new? Well, they've done a bit of work in the arrange part of the software, which is always a poor cousin of the session view, I find. And they've done vocal comping, which means you can do multiple takes of vocals. So they've kind of put in a little bit more of that DAW stuff. You know, the stuff that makes DAWs DAWs. the audio side, actually recording sound as opposed to just samples and loops and clever stuff. It likes the clever stuff, of course. I mean, it excels at the clever stuff. But we want to do some of the basics too. And so the ability to do multiple takes and then comp a vocal track or a guitar track or whatever it is you're recording is a really nice thing. It also now has MPE support, which is very important and a step towards getting towards MIDI 2.0. So you can now edit all of your rolly, seaboard, squashiness, and other bits and pieces that you can stuck in there. You can now edit all those pitches and aftertouches individually and perfectly well in the complex nature of the way those sorts of things work. There's a whole load of performance features. They've stuck in a load of new devices along with some randomization and probability engines. And of course, a whole load of work's been done on the core audio engine and on all those sorts of bits and pieces. So as with all major updates, you're just kind of left feeling, was that a big update or not? I'm not really sure. But inevitably, there's masses of stuff that's gone on behind the scenes in order to prepare a new version. And there does seem to be some fundamental changes, like in the arrangement of things. You can now link tracks together to edit them together, things like that, along with the vocal comping, the MPE support, more devices and bits and pieces going in. There's enough. I'm sure there's enough. Meanwhile, Cubase has gone all the way to 11. They've got there all the way without worrying about it. They just threw it on out there. So what's new in Cubase? Well, difficult to say really. I mean, they've really come on with their whole zone idea. The whole change they made in version 9 has bled through to everything else. So all of the windows, every single dialog window now has the same feel and look to it. So it's kind of consolidated all of that together. They've also done some massive work on the sampler track. Sampler track is really very, very cool. You just take a sample, piece of audio from anywhere, cut it out of a vocal track, cut it out of something else, put in a loop, just drop it into the editor at the bottom and it becomes a sample and you can then play it on your keyboard. Brilliant, old school sampling. Well, they've improved this now by adding in some modulation and filtering and key slice, automatic slice keyboard type stuff, and just made it instantly more playable. It was already really playable, but now it's even more playabler. They've also done some work on the key editor where you can now add curves and ramps to the automation lanes for things like pitch bend and other MIDI CC automation. They've brought in a scale assistant so you can now scale everything. You add a scale, add a root note, and your sequences will morph and change themselves to match that scale. And they've done some work on the scoring side of things too. They've done some good work on some of the plugins. The oscilloscope plugin, for instance, was looking all a little bit sort of Windows 95 and has done for many, many years. Very basic. Whereas now they've gone with this supervision idea, which has got all the metering in there. It can be an oscilloscope, it can be a spectrum analyzer, it can be a loudness analyzer, and it can see it in all sorts of different views, sonographs and vector graphs and stuff. I mean, it looks like the mastering section out of Studio One, I have to say, and probably enables Cubase to become a bit of a mastering piece of software all by itself, because you can now have all of the sort of metering that you need to hit all of those loudness points and to do comparisons and that kind of thing. Brilliant. It looks really, really nice. They've also improved the frequency EQ, the dynamic EQ in there, and they've introduced something called Squasher, which is where you take your given dance music, I suppose, and squash the bugger out of it so it's really, really loud and in your face and completely without any dynamics at all. It's fantastic. You should drop it on everything. Little modular company called Nano that I hadn't come across before. They've released a VCO called ONA, and it's nice. I mean, all their stuff looks really smart. It's got a nice aesthetic. It's very sort of soft and subtle and professional looking. It looks lovely, and they've got a range of modules, but the one that's just been released is their VCO, and it doesn't look particularly different or stunning. It just looks solid and nice, and it has all your usual stuff. But then at the bottom there's some outputs that you wouldn't normally see, some strange sort of wave-shaped outputs. There's a pair of complex waveform outputs which also respond to pulse width modulation. So basically the gist of it is it's a nice little oscillator that has some interesting wave shapes that can add quite a bit of character, particularly if you buy them, I think, in pairs or in fours. I think they have the potential of creating a really nice unison sound or detuned sound within your rack. And if you don't know what to do with two of them, well, you can turn one of them into a low frequency oscillator at the flick of a switch. A lot of sequencers around at the moment. This next one is called the OXI One. It's sort of been operating a bit under the radar at the moment, because it's been out a little while, or at least the information on it's been out for a little while, but I've only just really noticed it. This is interesting because it has 128, I think, velocity sensitive RGB button pads, if you like, so you can really see what's going on. Although oddly, it's only 64 steps, so you have 128 buttons, but only 64 steps. Don't know why that is, but it's 8 tracks, I think, although the description of it gets a little bit confusing because there seems to be 4 sequencers and yet 8 tracks, although potentially 64 tracks if it's over MIDI, but it's MIDI of course and CV, and I don't know exactly, but it's multifunctional in that you can use the pads like a deluge or like the push 2 and use it like an isomorphic keyboard and play different things on it, or you can use it as a grid sequencer, which is something that I really like. The ability just to tap buttons and then as the sequence moves through, those become pitch, if you see what I mean. So rather than see them as tracks, you see it as a piano roll on which you can put notes and you can choose a scale and all that sort of thing, and it's a very visual way of creating musical patterns. There's all sorts of randomization and probability potential going on, lots of modulation and all the usual sorts of craziness. The website's packed full of information that I couldn't quite penetrate enough to work out exactly what it could do and what it couldn't do and what it's all about, but it looks very, very interesting and should be coming to Kickstarter soon. The Synths Black Sequencer, which we probably first saw 18 months ago at a super booth, I think, is finally here. It's finally ready. I've had one for a little while. They were kind enough to send me one. It just blows my mind. And it's really, really interesting. It's very different to the Korg, because I've had the Korg one too. I'm playing the two sort of one after the other. They work in a very, very different way. The strength of the Black Sequencer is in these 16 encoders. Hear that? Those clicky encoders. They're amazing. You can just go in there and dial in all these pitches and off you go. Off you go. 4 channels of stuff going on. You've got ratcheting, you've got shuffle, you've got MIDI of course. It's less focused on the percussive side of things, so it doesn't have like 8 trigger outputs like other sequencers do. It really is CV gate and modulation 4 times, but you can turn it into a trigger sequencer and use 4 channels of the modulation outputs to do that if you so wish. But I guess Erica are thinking you'll probably be using their drum sequencer alongside or something else. So its focus is definitely on melody. It has this wonderful magic button that if you press it and then press something, it will just mess that up, in an interesting, ranged and intelligent way. But it's a lot of fun. It just gets you from, I don't really know what I'm doing, now I'm all over the place, which is fun. The firmware for it has only just arrived, and it is literally available, I think, at the end of this month. And so I've only really got into creating a couple of patterns on it. I haven't got any deeper with it, but I plan to do a proper review on it very soon, as soon as I can find the time, because it's a really, really interesting thing. Great display, tells you what's going on, you know where you are at all times. Great. Yeah, this is hoping to be, I think, the sequencer to rule all sequencers. Meanwhile, back in Tesseract modular land, we have the Tukra. The Tukra is a strange, weird looking trigger sequencer, I think. It's this grid of buttons and lights and sort of hieroglyphics, which not entirely sure whether they mean anything. I mean, if you look in the manual, there's a whole pages and pages telling you what those things mean, and that, I think, has allowed them to produce a module that doesn't require any menus. So it's kind of complicated and a lot of stuff going on, but it's all up there on the front panel, just probably through the use of some kind of shift button in order to get all these functions to function. So, 8 channels of trigger sequencing, I think, but more than that. Somewhere stuffed inside is a sampler. You can stick in an SD card, stick samples on it. I mean, one-shot samples, it's not trying to be clever multi-sampled instruments or anything like that, just a bunch of samples, and you can trigger those. It has its own audio output for that. And then along with that, there's also a drum synthesizer inside. So you can kind of create and craft your own percussive sounds along with the samples, along with triggering other stuff as well. So it's a bit weird, this thing. Be interesting to find out what it sounds like, how it works, because there's no, or hasn't been up to now, any videos on it as such. Although maybe I'll find something and it's running there. Who knows? Who knows? But at the moment it's a little bit mysterious, but interesting. Certainly going to look funny in your rack. The Befaco Lich. Lich. Not really sure. Apparently it's named after some kind of dark wizard or evil creature of the night. Not that it's important. This is a module from Befaco. We did a bit of this on their modular day last month that I took part in. And they did a bit of a demo which still had me scratching my head trying to work out what is this about. The idea, right, is this comes from Rebel Technologies. Rebel Technologies had this platform called OWL. OWL was a DSP platform for which you could write algorithms which were essentially modular functions that you then stick onto the OWL either pedal or URAT module that would then run. It's a bit like a disting. It's a multifunctional DSP platform that can be all sorts of different modules depending on which algorithm you load. That's the idea. Now, Rebel Technology haven't really been doing much with it recently, and so Befaco got together with them and said, well, give it to us and we'll see if we can do something interesting. So they've stuck it into a different piece of hardware, which gives you a bunch of patch points in and out, some knobs, some controls, MIDI, that kind of thing, all built in, and gives you access to the entire OWL library of algorithms and modules and bits and pieces. And there's everything. I mean, there's oscillators, there's noise generators, there's envelopes and effects and reverbs and filters, there's weird cross-modulated, this anything you can dream up and program in sort of pure data or C++ or something like that can happen in this thing. And there's something like over 260 algorithms, patches, if you like, already up there by the community to download and enjoy. And you can add your own if you're a bit of a programmer. If not, you can probably open up somebody else's and fiddle with it a little bit to make it your own. It comes with 4 algorithms already built in: a reverb, a delay, a MIDI to CV converter, and something else I can't remember. But you can freely download the ones from the community and put those in instead. I have it in kit form over there. I plan to build it anytime soon, and then I'll give it a bit of a go and see how that works. It has a lot of potential of being all the missing pieces within your rack. Will it be easier to use on something like the Disting? Will it make itself more useful, perhaps, than something like the Disting? Which is, for me, my experience of the Disting is that it's occasionally very, very, very useful and then doesn't do anything for ages. Is this going to be something which will actually stay in use all the time? Don't know. Interesting, though. And there's a lot of this about as well in the next one. Yeah, I mean, Noise Engineering have also released a DSP platform, and their first module that they built on that was the Desmodo Versio, which is a reverb. But the idea is that it's a module. It's got a whole load of in and out and knobs on it, and it can take different firmwares to give it different functionality. So the first one they released was based on a reverb firmware. It's fantastic, interesting, quirky, just like Noise Engineering is going to be. You know it's going to be a bit weird, and it is, in buckets. They've just released a new firmware for it called the Imitor Versio, and this is a delay, a 12-tap delay. So lots of delay stuff going on that you can manipulate and faff around with and all that sort of thing. They've released a new front panel for it, so it is its own standalone module, but it can also load the Desmodo firmware, and the Desmodo can load this firmware. And so to make all this happen, they've created a bit of a portal on the website where as customers you can go log in and get access to these firmwares, and they've stuck a new one up there which is just a simple additional firmware that you can try, which is called Ampler Versio, right? And it's an ADSR control VCA in resonant multimode filter gate with a stereo bypassable chorus. There you have it. So yeah, this is all interesting stuff. I mean, the Befaco and this, both interesting times having these multifunctional modules that you can do stuff with. The Noise Engineering one is based on the Daisy, the Electro Music Daisy, which was this platform that we saw at NAMM and NAMM ago, I think, which is interesting. It's also Qubit used the same platform for some of their modules. Interesting. It definitely sort of took off, that thing, and has given creative people like Noise Engineering the opportunity to think bigger, to think digitally, and to think outside of the confines of a module into a bigger design platform. Very interesting. and we'll just see how that goes. I would like to get my hands on one of those. Maybe I'll have a look at it after I've built the Lich, the wizard, the dark soul of the Befaco one. Right, I think that's it. I think it is. I think we got there. I'm right in the middle of Computer Week as well, my self-imposed, self-created week of computer music related live streams that I've been doing this week. So I'm a little bit worn out from all that as well. And I've got another one coming up in not too long either that I've got to get myself together for. But by the time you see this, it will probably all be over, but it'll be worth checking out the live streams, which will be on YouTube forever. You can go and enjoy them after the event. Perhaps the one to point out, if I'm able to get this edited down quick enough, is that Friday night I'm doing live Windows tweaking. Yeah, we're going to talk about Windows tweaking. Going to tweak my Surface, show you how to do that to get everything running with the latest update of Windows, all those sorts of things. We're going to be looking at that, so do come along and talk to me about that. But failing that, if you can't make that, then try to make it on Sunday, because this Sunday, as usual, we'll have a live stream together to talk about this month's monthly and to have a general chat about synths and stuff, and to talk about and sort of bring to a close the Computer Music Week. So all of that's going to be happening on Sunday night, I think. So that's exciting. And also, I'm like 50 in 2 weeks' time. Is that exciting? I really don't know. I'm going to have to do a birthday jam. I think that's probably going to be important. I might have to try to work that in somewhere in between eating cake and stuff. So that'll do. I think that's us all caught up. Do feel free to get in touch and express yourself over your thoughts and feelings on these sorts of things. I'm always open to people having a bit of a rant that I can then argue with and tell you you're stupid, that kind of thing. I enjoy being able to do that. And if you feel so inclined, do please pop over to Patreon and throw us a couple of dollars so that I can keep this gravy train rolling. And subscribe. And there's something about hitting a bell I keep hearing other people say. I've never really known what that's about. But anyway, subscribe, come along, join the live stream, join the chat, get in touch, stay on Facebook, Instagram, all these different places. I am knocking around and I'm always open to doing cool stuff. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.